As a kid, I've always wanted to play games that were definitely not suited for my age. I mean, everyone did it. And thankfully, my country never really cared much about regulating games, so access wasn't really a problem. But now as an adult, even I have never delved into the world of adult games. Mostly because I didn't really want to broadcast to friends on Steam that I was playing stuff like this, but also, a lot of them don't really have much going in the other aspects of gameplay. At least, that's what I thought. The adult game market has been steadily growing throughout the years, and after playing over 8 different adult games, interviewing a fellow YouTuber, interacting with the community, and doing a lot of research, I've seen that there's so much more to this side of gaming than what I and other people might initially perceive. And I have the pleasure of sharing this with you. So if you're also new to this side of gaming, why don't you join me and we can discover it together. Don't look at me like that, it's all educational. I swear. Now, players are generally open to playing different types of games as long as they're fun for us. And adult games aren't too different in this regard. But what does set them apart is how they also target a specific form of fun, which is what gives it a certain reputation. I mean, it's hardly a surprise, right? But it is interesting, especially when we consider what is deemed okay for video games. Let's take, for example, the most anticipated game for 2025, GTA 6. Grand Theft Auto has had a rocky reputation with the media, especially during its earlier years. I've played a lot of the mainline GTA games, and a lot of its content is something my mom would never approve of had she known that's what she was buying for me. But funny enough, within the player community, talking about GTA is now as easy as talking about your lunch with someone. But interestingly, adult games don't share this luxury. Even within the gaming community, there is a certain stigma surrounding anything sexual. You can mention it if it's a feature in certain games, but when it's a central aspect of a game, suddenly it's not really regarded as well. In making this video, I had the absolute pleasure to talk to Tom from Adult Gaming Reviews to get his perspective. His channel is the reason I even thought about making a video on this topic, because Tom has made a lot of content talking about adult games in the past 2 years and has built a community of 46,000 subscribers along with a Discord server, which would indicate that there's a huge audience for this medium. And what he had to say made so much sense. He noted how sure, there are a lot of people who play these games for the sexual aspect of it, but that's not necessarily the majority. That's because if somebody was looking to get one off quickly, adult games are likely not going to be the first choice. For example, porn videos are just a couple of clicks away. You watch it, maybe skip the shitty plot setup, do the deed, and you're done. You're rarely thinking about it afterwards. Unless what you did it to was, something nasty, in which case you're probably regretting it afterwards. But the point is that if players are just after the short-term gratification, adult games are far from the ideal method. Because a lot of these good games don't come free, they're not as easy to obtain, and the payoff requires effort from your part most times. That means that there's something about these games that keep people coming back. And like any form of entertainment, these reasons can vary. But what's fascinating is how these preferences intertwine with how the adult gaming market is currently operating. Much like regular games, adult games tend to be categorized in 2 broad umbrellas, and it's mostly based on geography. First, we've got Western-style games that go into more realistic renders and animation, with many games being short experiences that can be finished within around 10 to 20 hours on average. And then we have the Eastern or Japanese style, which tends to be more 2D design, and focuses a lot on character development and narrative, pushing a lot of these games towards the 30 and even 50-hour mark. But these differences go much deeper than just the playtime or visuals. Western games tend to be, well, a Wild West type of landscape, with devs having their own catalog of projects, with few of them having large teams working on these games. Most of the time, you'll have a lone developer who'll have their own projects to work on and mostly rely on Patreon or Steam to release their games and create their communities. It's vastly different in Japan, where a lot of these games are being created and released by companies. That's because adult games are an established form of media in Japan, dating back to the 80s. So compared to the mostly digital medium that Western adult games release in, you can actually find physical copies of Japanese eroge if you go to popular areas like Akihabara in Tokyo. This naturally creates different expectations for the quality because sure, you'll have some bad games in Japan, but they're much rarer as companies tend to have more developers and financing to create games. Meanwhile, there are a ton of bad or even incomplete Western adult games due to the aforementioned method of development in that space. Now, quality is an important element to a game's mass appeal, but there's another element that can also be pretty divisive for players. You see, as we're dealing with adult content, you best bet the government's going to have a close eye on these games. Japan, for example, has strict rules on censorship for adult media, which is why you'll find that most of them have their body parts blurred or in mosaics. These used to be more lax for developers who release internationally, but now restrictions have tightened to include all versions of eroge, regardless if it's released locally or internationally. This, along with the use of more static 2D scenes, is why I assume a lot of Japanese games are more narrative and writing heavy compared to their Western counterparts, as they now have to use other methods to add immersion and depth that can't be done visually. This isn't to say that Western games don't have restrictions. For example, Steam or Patreon are against more controversial themes, and a lot of it is still dependent on the country that you're in, as Steam does have the tendency to outright ban games for countries like Germany instead of working with the existing restrictions in that country. The important thing to note is that a lot of these games come in a variety of formats that are quite fun and creative. I know that sounds hard to believe, but after playing around 8 different adult games, I started to get it. Some of them got me staying up until 2 AM on a weekday because of how great the experience and writing is. If you want a good narrative experience about college life with a lot of paths and choices, you can opt for a game like Being a Dick. Now don't judge it too quickly because of the name, it's pretty popular in fact. You can get it on Steam, and I honestly had a really good time with it because of the great writing and the amount of freedom to shape your character, offering a lot of replayability that not many AAA titles can even claim to do nowadays. If you're looking for something more sci-fi, Ripples and Eternum are also really good games, with the former having a mystery involving time travel and the latter having a story surrounding a virtual reality game that has a dark conspiracy that the main character is looking to solve. If you want a classic Final Fantasy style game, you've got the Rance Quest series, which is a proper JRPG released in the late 80s. The mechanics are very similar to classic turn-based RPGs with a surprisingly complex gameplay system, so fans of the genre who also want to spice up their experience can opt for that game. I gotta warn you though, the main character is a little bit... okay, no, he's a huge asshole, so your enjoyment might depend on your tolerance for that. There's also a lot of cool dating sim-like games like Hush Hush, where there is a mystery and dark past behind the girls you try to date, and a calendar system that's quite similar to games like Persona, where you need to juggle a schedule and different activities in order to get the best ending. I can go on and on and on about the games I got to try, and how amazing they are, as many of them are oozing with creativity and good narratives. But things aren't all good in this sphere, and I think those like me who are new to it and plan on exploring deserve to know some of the more controversial or divisive aspects of this part of the industry. The first one is something we actually touched on earlier, and is something that's more prevalent in the Western style of adult games. In general, creating a game that'll become popular is already hard in of itself. Doing so for adult games is much harder, as you'll naturally have a smaller audience pool for it and a lot of competition. But if you succeed, the dividends are going to be massive. There are 2 main ways that Western-style devs tend to use to monetize their work. There's the traditional way, which is you make a game and then release it on a platform like Steam or itch.io where people can buy it, then rinse and repeat. But some devs don't want to or can't go for just a single purchase method. Adult games take effort to make and come with the added risk of restrictions from platforms like Steam. This is why many developers opt to use Patreon or some equivalent for their community and to express their creative vision. In theory, this is great because then a creator can constantly put out content, as the revenue from these subscriptions will keep them going. This typically applies for games that are pretty large and are thus cut up into chapters or seasons, and the dev can then use this method to kind of crowdfund subsequent content from a dedicated community. Being a Dick is an example of this, where the developer Dr. Pinkcake releases chapters of the game on Steam, but patrons can get them much earlier, and if you're subscribed to a higher tier membership, you can get a lot of interesting bonuses like wallpapers, votes in community polls, and priority for updates and future releases. This model is okay to a certain extent, because games are made by people and, well, people can get greedy. There are many cases where devs create really good games that aren't complete, but because the quality is so high, they attract a huge audience. Don't get me wrong, delays can happen for any game dev, especially if they're doing this part-time. But some of the bigger ones earn hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars in annual subscriptions that it makes you raise an eyebrow on whether their intentions are genuine, as you can already hire a full team with that kind of money. Now, I won't be giving any examples, but I'm sure any adult game player will have a few names at the top of their head when this topic is brought up. So if you're keen on supporting devs with this kind of model, do a little bit of due diligence first to make sure you're not getting scammed. Tom made a full video on this on his channel that I highly recommend, so be sure to check that out as well. Another thing to take note of, especially for any women who are looking to get into this type of games, is that a lot of them, especially the good ones, are very straight male-centric. A funny analogy I got from Tom, who got it from his girlfriend, is that adult games, by and large, are like romance or smut novels for guys. You know how there's a lot of criticism that games cater to the male gaze oftentimes? Now, there's a lot more nuance for that discussion when it comes to regular games, but arguably less so when it comes to adult games. This isn't to say that there aren't any good adult games for women or the LGBTQ community. Some really good recommendations I've gotten include games like College Craze, which has a female MC going on her first year of college, and it's great for players who are looking for a more female perspective, and something also made by women. The Symbiont is a shorter experience than some of the ones I've mentioned, but it has a pretty interesting sci-fi space theme with full voice acting, a gorgeous 2D art style, and is great for audiences looking for more action, if you get what I mean. And finally, there's Actual Roommates, where you play as a female data analyst who is telling her story of how she built her harem with her roommates and other women. I'm definitely sure there are more, but these are just a few examples, but it is important to understand who the dominant audience is for these types of games, especially, and games that cater to other sexual orientations and genders are still few and far between. Lastly, as we're dealing with adult themes, it's also important to note that a lot of these games can go into darker places and more frowned upon genres. We briefly mentioned how Steam has restrictions on certain themes, but anybody who's into a lot of anime and manga knows how much Japanese adult media, including games, are filled with themes and preferences that will likely turn off a lot of people. There are also games that delve into mental illness and sometimes trauma for certain characters, and a lot of these are actually done quite tastefully, but it might trigger people with certain experiences. What I found pleasantly surprising is how some of the bigger devs take steps to make sure that the audiences are aware if there are potential harmful sequences in their games. Dr. Pinkcake, the creator of Being a Dick, actually created a full-on interaction at the beginning of the game to make sure that the player is in the right mindset to play, and is aware that certain scenes might be offensive, which I think is fantastic. Be that as it may, not all games have this warning, so if you're struggling with something or have past experiences related to the themes of adult games, it's best to use your discretion and maybe ask people on subreddits or servers like r/adultgaming or NSFW Gaming to make sure that you're comfortable with the game you plan to get. But Sai, why take the time to acknowledge these realities when the argument was that there's more to this genre than meets the eye? Doesn't this just mean that the genre perpetuates a lot of the negative stereotypes and behaviors that we're trying to correct in society and among men? Well, the fact of the matter is that a lot of these problematic aspects don't exist because of the games, but because of the people. At the end of the day, these are just games. In the same way that shooting games don't make a person violent, adult games should not make a person abusive or problematic. Devs that are scamming people do not represent all adult gaming devs. Many of them are incredibly passionate about the work they do and the communities they've built. Likewise, if you're somebody who delves into more socially unacceptable themes in games, that's mostly on you, because major platforms like Steam have already banned a lot of these themes, and so you'll have to put in a lot of effort to actually create or play controversial or really problematic games. If there's one thing that I want you, the viewer, to take away from this video though, it's something that Tom said that resonated with me after playing so many of these games, and that a lot of them succeed because they're able to connect with their audience, and that they allow people to live out their fantasies in a safe and non-disruptive environment, which is what all games are about. Whether it was a cool anime reference, an accurate scene about musical instruments, or even just an interesting fact about an activity I'm unfamiliar with, I personally felt like I connected a lot with the developers because it feels like they're genuinely trying to express themselves, their interests, and their creativity through their games. I've gotten to connect with the community and talk with people who just love to send memes, joke about adult games, and converse about it like they would any other mainstream title. What I really want to say and what I realized is that this makes adult games art. And like any art or piece of entertainment, it will have its dark sides. It'll have toxic communities, it'll have problematic fans, but what matters is how you personally appreciate it and how you treat it distinctly from reality. But if after this video you still have doubts about it, then why not give it a shot yourself? And let me know in the comments what you've learned. But that's it from me. This has been an incredibly fun video to make, and I would love to give a shout out again to Tom from Adult Gaming Reviews and the awesome members from his Discord server like Sen, who welcomed me and humored my interests in the world of adult games. Like and subscribe if you like what you see, and comment down below if you got any thoughts. This is Sai from Fireplace Gaming, and I hope you're having a great day. Catch you in the next one.